Well, Russian President Vladimir Putin will not travel to Istanbul in Turkey today for direct talks with his Ukrainian counterpart, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Putin has named a delegation that will travel for these talks and reportedly include seasoned negotiators, but the Russian president himself will not travel. Now, SABC News correspondent Cullen is in Istanbul and has more on today's talks to potentially move towards an end to the war in Ukraine. Ross, good morning. So we always knew that it was up in the air as to whether Vladimir Putin himself would travel to Istanbul. It has now been confirmed he would not. But Zelenskyy, on the other hand, had indicated earlier that he would be traveling. What are we hearing on that front?
Yes, he is going to be here in Turkey for meetings with the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Those meetings scheduled to take place in the capital, Ankara. And earlier in the week, Volodymyr Zelenskyy had said that he and President Erdogan would be willing to travel to Istanbul to take part in those direct talks with Vladimir Putin if the Russian leader confirmed his presence. But we didn't get any word on that earlier in the week on Monday. He was also quiet in the Kremlin in terms of who was going to come to Istanbul on Tuesday. It was only very late on Wednesday, late last night, that the Kremlin confirmed the makeup of the delegation who will be here in Istanbul for those first face-to-face peace talks with Ukraine since 2022. Not on the list, President Putin. Instead, that team will be headed up not even by the foreign minister, but by the top presidential aide, Vladimir Medinsky.
And how do you think, Ross, this will impact the sort of negotiations and, of course, the agenda that would have been crafted for this meeting?
Well, President Zelenskyy of Ukraine said that Russia must not play games, saying that Vladimir Putin should come to these talks. And if he doesn't, it shows that the president of Russia is not serious about wanting to end the war. President Zelenskyy said the time for technical negotiations and ministerial level meetings is over. It's now time for a presidential face-to-face. But that is not what President Putin has agreed to. He has sent a team of technocrats and they'll be meeting their Ukrainian counterparts because although President Zelenskyy wants an immediate ceasefire on the air, land and sea imposed, Russia seems to be wanting to try to take a lengthier route. It says that the discussions that need to be had on a billion different levels, to quote the presidential aide Yuri Ushakov yesterday. So Russia feels there's a lot of discussions that need to happen before they can approach the discussions about a ceasefire. And so we're likely to have some of those meetings today. But Ukraine's ambition for what it wants to get out of these talks in Istanbul, back here in the city for the first time since 2022, the main ambition for Ukraine is that immediate ceasefire.
And the position from Erdogan in Ankara, are they hopeful as negotiators to this potential peace deal that there would be significant progress made during this meeting, Ross?
Well, Turkey is trying to continue to play this brokering role between the two sides. So it hosted talks in Istanbul that only came a couple of days after the start of Russia's full-scale invasion in late February 2022. So representatives from Kiev and representatives from Moscow met here in Turkey's largest city for ultimately unsuccessful talks to try to bring the war to an end just after it had begun. Turkey is a member of NATO, but it is not in the EU. It hasn't signed up to the huge European packages of sanctions that have been imposed on Moscow. Its airlines are still flying daily between Russia and Turkey, and all of Russia's oil that comes in and out of the Russian ports in the Black Sea and all of Ukraine's wheat exports that come in and out of the Black Sea travel down the Bosporus Strait, which you can see behind me. So Turkey's got this interesting geopolitical role, and it's trying to show that it can be a neutral location for talks to happen. And certainly it seems that Russia and Ukraine have agreed that talks can take place in Turkey.
And just a final one, Ross, is there any indication of any other delegations who may be interested in these talks, who may attend in some way or form, be that from the United States or from the EU or elsewhere?
Yeah, so the United States is always very involved, and President Trump left the door open to the possibility of coming here to attend the talks in Istanbul. But that only seemed to be a likely possibility if Vladimir Putin confirmed his presence. You would have all three presidents then, Zelenskyy, Putin and Trump, all of them here in Istanbul. But Donald Trump, who's currently in the Gulf region on a tour of nations there, did say that he thought that President Putin wouldn't come to Istanbul if President Putin thought that Donald Trump wasn't going to go. Donald Trump said, I could play that mediating role, but in the end he's not coming, but United States representatives are. So Marco Rubio is already here in Turkey, the US Secretary of State. He's been attending an informal meeting of NATO foreign ministers in the southern Turkish city on the Mediterranean coast of Antalya, and we understand also that Steve Witkoff, the Special Middle East envoy for President Trump, and Keith Kellogg, the Special Russia-Ukraine envoy for President Trump, both of them will also be joining Mr. Rubio here for talks in Istanbul with both sides on Friday. But what the United States is hoping is that alone Russia and Ukraine can make gets involved in.
All right. We've just lost that connection to our correspondent, Cullen, who's in Istanbul, keeping an eye on those talks for us.